to be working. Good morning, everyone. I will now move to call to order the meeting of the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Commission for August 27, 2021 at 0800 in the morning. Before we get to agenda item A, Vice Chair Baker has a couple of comments she is going to make.
Thank you, Larry. The reason that Larry began the meeting is that we realized that we haven't done essentially a committee report on our joint partnership with Oregon to try to get concurrency on Columbia River rules generally. And we decided, so Larry and I decided that we should do a very short version of what we've done so far and a little bit of preview of what's coming. The main thing is to let you know about an agreement that we've made just among ourselves. This agreement has no policy or current regulatory or legal authority, but we needed to let the rest of the commission know about it and give you a chance to read it if you haven't already. I'm going to ask Nikki to put it up. I'm also going to ask Nikki to make sure that it's sent to every one of us and let us know if we have any problems. But I don't think so. This was an extremely collaborative process. Commissioner McIsaac and I primarily worked in a smaller writing group with Commissioner Woolley, and to some extent Chair Wall in Oregon to come up with this essentially agreement about what our objectives are in the Columbia River fishery management. And the objectives that we were talking about, this seems so old to us. Sorry to repeat for the people who have been on the committee, but this is only our conservation goals. This isn't the nuts and bolts of the fisheries or the things that many of our stakeholders are particularly interested in. This isn't who gets to catch what fish, but this is what our overall commission objectives are as we're designing the policy for these fisheries. So I'm going to go through this, just the changes, the big changes from current practice, or at least maybe not even changes, maybe we're saying it for the first time. Very quickly go through this. It'll take less than a minute. Nikki, please scroll down to keep going so we get a lot of it on there. So we moved the bar a bit. We are looking to promote not just Jeopardy standards, but the recovery of ESA listed stocks in that river. And the other thing we've done in the first guiding principle is add other native species. So we're looking at much more of what we're doing here is validating what staff is already doing. Staff considers other species as they're managing those fisheries. I think everybody knows that we've delegated most of our fishery management to the director and staff. So we are just validating what they already do and including other native species, basically an ecosystem management approach as our first guiding principle. We're also, this is an important one. We certainly all know that we aren't the only people worried about Columbia River fish or endangered species. And there are some there's very good work going on outside of the purview of WDFW. And so we've been briefed on that, and we want to at least support the short and long-term qualitative and quantitative goals of the Columbia Basin Partnership Task Force. This task force is a big group that is being managed on the governor level within 4 states right in our watersheds, and a bunch of very smart people representing every constituency group that cares about salmon is participating. They are now morphing into what they're calling the Columbia Basin Collaborative. They are going to take their goals and turn them into action items, and we want to be a part of that and do our part. Let's keep going, Nikki. Got to go quick. Thank you. We make the point here loud and clear that conservation and recovery of our fish in this case is our first priority. I don't know that we've ever said that clearly. Again, we talk about we want to promote the conservation of all ESA listed wild stocks, and we want to get more consistent with historic abundance. Let's go down. We're almost done with this. We want to convene a policy joint state body to talk about thermal refugia, and we want to carefully consider a very new EPA report on refuges. My guess is we'll hear a little bit more about that at the meeting later this morning with Oregon on steelhead. And then lastly, we talked about how this is an all-H strategy, but we don't go into hatchery and harvest in this document because that's for our next meeting. This is, again, just conservation. And then I think finally, going down, Nikki, finally, and probably most importantly, or at least part of most importantly, are you there, Nikki? Well,
not look moved.
It hasn't moved on my screen, but that's okay. The last one is that we call out climate change and short-term environmental climate change patterns in our adaptive management section on this document. So saying all this to possibly make sure that you all know what we are up to on the Columbia River. We have another meeting later this morning at 10 o'clock, specifically on steelhead. We have a meeting set on October 27th to try to begin to finalize our negotiations. And we all think that we might need one more meeting. These are open meetings, and we invite your interest and participation. I've asked Nikki to send this document out to everyone to make sure you have it, and not exactly sure how you get your comments back, but at the very least send them to Nikki. So thank you. And I'd like to especially thank Commissioner McIsaac, Don, for working through us. We put in, I think, 8 drafts going back and forth of this document. So it wasn't something that we just sat down and did in 15 minutes.
Well stated, Barbara. Well done. I think that's probably helpful to the folks that haven't had a chance to review that or read it. So having said that, I'll hand the gavel back to you for this meeting.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Wow. Okay. Well, aside from me, are there any other committee reports or any other comments that commissioners want to make before we begin our agenda with the supplemental budget proposal? Okay, everybody's quiet. Let's go then to agenda item A, 2022 Columbia River Supplemental Budget Proposal. This is a decision. I think Morgan Stinson, are you leading this off?
That's right, Commissioner. Good morning, Chair Carpenter and members of the Commission. I'm Morgan Stinson, the Chief Financial Officer for WDFW. I'm joined today by Dr. Hurst, the Columbia River Management Unit Lead, and Raquel Crozier, Special Assistant to the Director of the Fish Program. Today, will present on a policy level budget item for the Columbia River gillnet license reduction and alternative gear. So today we'll talk a little bit about the letter that the governor sent on this issue. We'll cover the follow-up items that were given to staff by the Fish Committee. We'll cover the license reduction, an alternative gear, and how that might interact with salmon recovery. Generally, the budget proposal has 4 elements: alternative gear, a kind of communication and outreach and policy support angle, a fisheries assessment, and then finally a license reduction. We'll follow up with an update on all the outreach that we've already done, and of course, have time for questions. So, as the Commission well knows, we received a request from Governor Inslee in a letter for a supplemental budget proposal. Other items that were specifically included in there were recommendations for a voluntary license reduction program, interested in outlining a path forward for improving understanding and implementation for alternative gears, and including science and monitoring needs. There's an emphasis in the letter on ensuring salmon recovery and conservation and sustaining responsible fisheries, and of course, working with Oregon on those matters. The budget proposal that we have has those 4 pieces. We've got the estimated dollar amounts for those presented. We'll see a little bit more on the dollar specificity at the end of this presentation. The total is $3.4 million, and it has each of those 4 pieces in it. For now, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Hurst to cover some of the other premises and assumptions.
Great, thank you, Morgan. So this first piece is a little bit of background context setting for those folks who may not be as familiar. So bear with us here. We have about 5 or 6 slides on this. So next slide, please, Morgan. So, in the governor's letter identified a relationship between license reduction, alt gear, and salmon recovery. And we had a few things we would like to clarify about that relationship. So the harvest constraints for Columbia River salmon fisheries are informed by many different things. Federal law is one of those, such as the Endangered Species Act. Part of that is recovery plan creation. And then also within the Endangered Species Act, consultations on actions that can impact listed species is required. So for the Columbia River fisheries, at least for salmon and steelhead and sturgeon, we have the U.S.-Oregon management agreement that deals with that, and that was consulted on by NOAA Fisheries and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Endangered Species Act. There are also federal court orders. The U.S.-Oregon case is one of those. And in addition, there are co-manager agreements. U.S.-Oregon is one of those. We have some also in some of our tributary areas. And then there are things that Vice Chair Baker already identified, such as the regional plans in the Columbia Basin Partnership. And so all of those things are things that we consider when we manage fisheries, and they also provide the harvest constraints that we're managing too. And so kind of the take-home message that we would like to impart on this topic is that the number of licenses and gear used in our lower Columbia River commercial fisheries are important considerations in sustainable fisheries management. But they don't impact our ability to remain within the harvest constraints that we are managing to. And there'll be a few more slides that I think expands on this concept going forward. So next slide, please, Morgan. So our proposal overall fits within the existing framework that we have in the Columbia River for fisheries. We have sort of the overall harvest impacts that are shared by all co-managers are established by co-manager agreement and consulted on by the federal agencies under the Endangered Species Act. Then that's broken down into kind of 2 bins. You have your non-treaty harvest impact allocation, which is where the state's piece goes, and you have your treaty harvest impact allocation for our treaty tribes. And this is also established by case law and by co-manager agreement. Sort of stepping down another level, you can further subdivide the non-treaty harvest impact allocation to various sectors. And in our case, we have a recreational harvest allocation and a commercial harvest allocation. And that's established by our commission policy 3630, and also in conversations to reach concurrency with Oregon. Next slide, please, Oregon. Or Morgan. I just called you Oregon. Morgan. So I thought we'd spend the next 3 or 4 slides coming up with some cartoon illustrations for some of these concepts just to help. I'm a visual learner, and I hope this helps others too. But so when we talk about allocation, that's different than the harvest constraint. So we have if you just think about it as we have a harvest constraint, we're limited to 100 fish. The allocation piece is when you divide those 100 fish into different limits for each of the sectors. So, for example, in this slide, Sector B has 60 fish and Sector A has 40 fish. But you're not changing the overall harvest constraint with allocation. You're just subdividing it. Go ahead, Morgan. So the next concept is conservation. And this is different from allocation because you can take your harvest constraint, but in order to have a conservation benefit as such, you would need to reduce that harvest constraint to something less than what it is now. Next slide, please, Morgan. So how does license reduction kind of fit into this? Well, if you had 60 licenses and you had an allocation for that sector that has the licenses of 60 fish, then if all fishers are equally successful at catching fish, which is, I admit, a big assumption, you would get 1 fish per fisher. If you reduce the number of licenses to, say, 20, as you see in the second line, you're not changing the allocation to that sector, and you end up with 3 fish per fisher. So each fisher is perhaps able to catch more fish because the same number of fish are still available, there's just fewer fishers fishing. Next slide, please, Morgan. So we're going to walk through an example also with alternative gears. And when you implement alternative gears, again, you're not changing the harvest constraint. That sort of, whatever you have 100 fish, I think in our earlier example, and you're not changing the commercial allocation. In this example, we're using 60 fish. But what you could do is extend the commercial season if you're using your impacts at a slower rate. And so by impacts, what I mean here is the number of fish that are allocated. So those 60 fish are used more slowly. And what this may also provide is more time to harvest hatchery origin salmon. So overall, if the gears work out the way that we hope they will, you'll have a longer season where you're able to catch more hatchery fish. So in this cartoon at the bottom, again, you have 2 different gears. Gear A is a type of gear that burns 6 fish per day. So if you were to put all of your allocation into Gear A, you would have 10 fishing days. Gear B is impacts 10 fish per day, so it's using 10 fish per day of the allocation, and therefore you have fewer fishing days. So in this example, 6. And so it's really a matter of which gear allows you to have a slower rate of impact. Next slide, please, Morgan. So hopefully that diversion was helpful. And now we're going to get into sort of the details of each of the 4 budget elements. So the first one we have here is alternative gear development and implementation. We're asking for about $226,000 for that element. And I just wanted to, again, take a little bit of a diversion and remind folks of what the goal is for alternative gears. So according to policy 3630, alternative gears are, meant to promote conservation goals and enhance and optimize economic benefits to the fisheries. And there are really 2 objectives for doing that. One is to increase gear selectivity compared to current capabilities to increase our ability to harvest hatchery fish. Lots of things our managers consider when they develop fishing seasons, such as time, place, manner. An example of manner would be mark selective. Also mortality rates of the gears and the handle for each of those gears. So there's a lot to think about when you're sort of deciding on which gears are suitable and which parts of the season. There's also the second objective of promoting state conservation for things like controlling hatchery fish on the spawning grounds. So next slide, please, Morgan. And this element is, sorry, not element. This slide is meant to recap what we've been doing with our efforts on the emerging commercial fishery front. This is not part of the budget proposal, but we thought it might be useful context to know that outside of the budget proposal, we're also pursuing some regulatory work for alternative gears. And so an emerging commercial fishery is something that's in statute. And what it does is it allows us to experiment in a commercial manner with different types of gears for a fishery, in this case, the Lower Columbia River fishery. Our director, Kelly Susoen, decided in April of 2021 to go ahead and initiate a rulemaking to designate an emerging commercial fishery for alternative gears. So we posted a CR 101, which is the first step in our rulemaking, on May 19th. And right now we're working on our CR 102, which is what the Washington Administrative Code language will be. We're also finishing up our State Environmental Policy Act analysis, or SEPA. And we will be starting work on a small business economic impact statement shortly to accompany that draft language. So assuming that all goes through and the rule becomes final, then during the emerging commercial fishery phase, our goal will be to collect information on the gaps that we have right now for some of the alternative gears we're pursuing. And those are for things like economics, ESA impacts, marketability, and other elements that we can't really fully understand that well with a research or a test fishery, just because of the limitations that we have with those particular tools. And then after a number of years, I think the statute says 5, then we move on to compiling all of the information we've learned into a summary report that goes to the Washington legislature and is shared with all other interested folks, including you all as commissioners, co-managers, partners, and stakeholders. The legislature then can choose to use that information to decide whether or not to legalize the gears that were as part of the emerging commercial fishery. And we anticipate that there'll be future funding requests as we progress through these steps. Thanks, Morgan. Next slide. So getting back on track to our budget proposal, for alternative gears, we kind of identified 4 elements to this budget proposal. The first one is just an overarching goal to diversify the research efforts underway. We have a few research efforts that we're working on, and we also know that there's work that Wild Fish Conservancy is doing on the pound net. We'd like to do more on diversifying what it is we're working on. The second element piece of this is that industry, I think, had a really good idea for us to maybe work on a literature review to compile all the information we have on alternative gears since we started testing them 15, 20 years ago. So there's a lot of work that's been done already, and no real good synthesis of that or lessons learned. And we're hoping that in doing so, that will help point us in a direction of where to go next. The third piece here is some money to conduct some research. So, we don't yet know the specifics of this, but, design and conduct a study to investigate either mortality rates or handle rates for some other aspect of alternative gears. And the last piece here is to develop a streamlined approach for fishers to apply for some of the paperwork that's needed to implement the gears that we're hoping to use. Next slide, please. So the second element of our 4-element budget proposal is communication, outreach, and policy support for $388,000. Next slide, please, Morgan. So this one sort of has 3 pieces to it. Where the first one is to create communication materials on Columbia River fisheries, wild salmon conservation and recovery. We have a lot of material already out there in the form of joint state staff reports, and other things. But they're pretty lengthy, and information can be hard to decipher for folks who aren't as steeped in this stuff. And so we'd like to create, think outside the box a little bit about maybe some videos or some, FAQs that are short and sweet to try to help more folks understand the relationships amongst these things, as well as how the nuts and bolts of this stuff works. The second piece is we do have a seafood marketing team that Raquel heads up, and they've largely they've been doing a lot of really good work, but having some money to help support their efforts would be really helpful for creating content for seafood consumers. And the third piece here is to support the already ongoing regional dialogues around Columbia River programs and policies. Things like the policy review committee that you all, or some of you are on with Oregon commissioners as well. So, next element, please, Morgan. So the third element in our proposal is a fisheries assessment piece for $620,000. Next slide, please, Morgan. This one, I think a third of that money is really to fund an ask for a one-time purchase of a, it's called a passive integrated transponder array, or a pit tag detector. So for those who may not know, there's a technique by which you can implant their like little glass tags into salmon and steelhead, usually into their stomach area, and that allows them to be detected as they swim over detectors, like you see here in this picture. This is a smaller one that's, I think, in Big Creek in Idaho. But as they swim over it, data is collected on things like where they're from, the origin, how old they are, and it tells fishery managers a lot, and also is useful for many other things. And so having something like that in the Lower Columbia would be really helpful for all of the work that we do. There is one in Clifton Channel on the Oregon side, but as you can imagine, when fish swim through Willamette Channel on the Washington side, the array on the Clifton side doesn't detect those fish. So we get some information. It could be a whole lot better with another detector there. And we also have some small ask for pit tags and supplies. Pit tags are a one-time use item, and then we also have things like implant guns and stuff to help put the tags in the fish. The second piece to this fisheries assessment is really an ask to have to help us with staffing to assist with developing and implementing a more rigorous monitoring plan. And we think, being able to do this gives us more certainty that we are within the harvest constraints that are established for Columbia River fisheries and all those forums and documents I mentioned earlier. And this would be things like, log books for all of our fisheries, or enhanced creel, to kind of get a better, more certain estimate of the data that we're collecting now. And I think now is my time to pass it over to Raquel. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Charlene. And again, I'm Raquel Crozier. I'm a special assistant in the fish program, and I'm going to talk to you today about the last and largest element in this budget proposal, the license reduction program. So we've got $2,170,000 built in for this part of the budget proposal. $2 million of that is for the purchasing back of Columbia River Willapa and Columbia River Grays Harbor gillnet licenses. We also have $170,000 built in there for some staff support in our licensing program to help with implementation, some assistance from the AGs for getting us through rulemaking, and continued work with a consultant. We've had a consultant, Resource Logic, working with us to help scope the program, and we want to keep them on board to help us through some of the outreach and implementation components of it. So in building the proposal, we went back to some of the overarching goals in C3630. And while there aren't specific goals in the policy around license reduction, there is kind of a broad goal around supporting an economically viable and stable commercial fishery. And license reduction can really help achieve that goal by better aligning the number of licenses to the available harvest in the fishery. So the remaining fishers have more opportunity and dependability in the fishery year to year. We also kept in mind some of the guidance we heard from the governor and some of the values we've heard from license holders and key partners over the last year and a half of doing this work. And some of those include that the program be voluntary, that it be appealing to active and inactive license holders. And the governor really pushed that. He wants us to try to purchase back all inactive licenses and as many active licenses as possible. In order to achieve that, the program really needs to be an incentive above market value so we can boost participation. We also want to make sure that it's a good use of public funds. And so wherever we can, making it as efficient and effective as possible and closing any loopholes that might exist. So in kind of thinking through program design, we looked at 5 different structures. We leaned really heavily on the research that Kim Gordon, our consultant from Resource Logic, did over the last year. And I'm not going to walk through all of these today, but I just want to let you guys know that we built in kind of an alternative analysis table to the briefing document that was provided to you that walks through what we looked at, what the pros and cons of each of these different designs might be. And so you can do a little bit of nerding out and research on your own if you're interested. What I will walk you through, though, is the preferred program structure that we are recommending, and that's the 2-choice program. And Morgan, you can go to the next slide where it'll talk a little bit more about that one. So in a 2-choice program, we allow participants based on kind of their situation and what feels like the right value of their license to participate either in a fixed price of $10,000 or by submitting a bid through a reverse auction. And a reverse auction is when the license holder can provide us their bid, and then we rank them and pay out lowest to highest until the program funds are expended. So in thinking about that fixed rate price, we were thinking about, what will actually get us the most participation? What will get us an incentive? And so we wanted to provide something above market value. And we took a look at Dock Street Brokers, which is one of the key online sales sites, and saw that they were going for $4,500 to $11,000 on Dock Street, with the latest sale in 2020 at $7,500. So $10,000 gives us a bump above that market rate. We also know that it's been a successful price point in past license reduction programs. So we had 3 license reduction programs for the Columbia River in the 90s. And in the 1998 program, we had 60 individual license holders sell at that $10,000 price point. And then if that price point doesn't feel competitive or fair, folks can participate in the reverse auction and set their own price. So we really think this provides a good alternative to what we put forward in the last legislative session, which was just that 10,000 fixed bid. And we're thinking a lot about, how to address potential loopholes and maximize the program effectiveness and cost efficiency. And I know Vice Chair Baker asked some good questions at our last meeting about, what legal authorities do we have to prevent participation across the river in Oregon if we were to, try to close that loophole. And we're just starting conversations with our AGs and with our licensing and enforcement teams, so we can really get a handle on, how do we disincentivize folks from participating in the program and then going out, purchasing a license and continuing to fish, whether it be a Washington or Oregon license. And it seems like there's some workable mechanisms there, but we're going to be testing those a bit more in the coming months. All right, so the Fish Committee at the August 5th meeting had some really great feedback for our team on, how to tweak this budget proposal a little bit. Asked for a change of title because it was a little broad and maybe misrepresented that this was going to implement the entire policy when it's really focused on license reduction and alternative gear. So we changed the title of the request. We also had advice to try to pull together a briefing document that answers some of these key questions. And so the 6-page briefing document that you all have is our first take at that. We've gotten a lot of great advice from commissioners over the last week on things to work in and edits. And I think it's really an improved document, but we're seeing it as something that will adapt over the coming months and will be a really helpful tool with legislators, the governor's office, and members of the public. The Fish Committee also asked that we do some additional outreach with recreational and commercial partners on the budget proposal. And so we've done some of that since the last meeting, and I'll walk you through some of that in a moment here. And they asked that we think about some of the outcomes of the license reduction alternative gear initiatives. And so we are starting to do some of that thinking about outcomes. Some of it is also really going to be done through the rulemaking process. So through rulemaking, we'll have a chance to think about the economic outcomes, the social outcomes, and the fishery outcomes associated with these initiatives. Next slide, Morgan. And you'll see some of the questions we're starting to think about in that vein. How do we think about ideal fleet size? How do we think about, optimizing harvest of hatchery fish? And how do we make sure that we've got the right suite of tools in terms of commercial fishing gears and prevent any major negative outcomes to coastal communities? Next slide, Morgan. So since we met last, we have done some additional outreach. So we had been doing some work through one-on-ones and focus groups with commercial fishers kind of early in the summer to scope these alternative program structures. And then we went out, we met with some of the recreational fishing groups that wrote the letter to the commission in early July and talked them through the budget proposal and got some input from them. We also met with a subset of our commercial advisors and a subset of our Columbia River recreational advisors and our Columbia River alternative gear work group. We also had the director send out some letters to license holders to give them an update. We had been communicating, that coming this fall, we'd be initiating a program. So we wanted to really flag for them kind of that we've got a different time frame. First of all, we're likely to have a different program structure and how they can engage in the process moving forward. We also had a letter go out from the director to some of our tribal co-managers. And in terms of feedback so far, we've had some really great feedback through those forums. We heard, questions around the relationship to conservation, questions and ideas on how to address loopholes. We heard some concerns around how these initiatives may influence future policy decisions on harvest allocation, questions around the $10,000 price point, whether it's competitive enough, whether it's, politically realistic, these sorts of questions, whether, pulling the number that we used from the programs in the 90s would be, the right price in today's dollars, given inflation. We also had encouragement to continue to work towards a 2-state program, some really great feedback on our messaging and future outreach and an emphasis on the need for buy-in from industry first, so we don't build a program that then doesn't get participation. So that's what we've done so far in terms of outreach. And I think at this point, I'm gonna kick it back over to Morgan to talk us through the dollars and cents.
Yep, we've just got a little bit of a breakdown of how this $3.4 million would work. It's a large push in the second fiscal year of this biennium, and then sort of tails off into some of those other elements as we work on some of the science and assessment pieces. Ultimately, we've got a motion language provided in the summary sheet. I think Nikki's got some slides too as well. At this point, I'd actually like to turn it over for questions.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, my guess is there will be some questions on this. Please denote by raising your hand. I see Commissioner Kuntz has a question. You're muted, Fred.
Someday we're all going to learn that. Probably by then we'll have in-person meetings. I want to start by thanking Morgan and Charlene and Raquel. I think that was really a great demonstration of the quality of our staff. The presentation was, really excellent and clear, and I appreciate that. I also have to confess that when I first heard about the license reduction program, I just assumed that there was a conservation benefit. And I suspect that most Washingtonians would think the same. Again, when you don't know the details about how the NOAA restrictions set the constraints, you just think like, oh, less fishermen out there that, it's going to help the fish. And so that was really very eye-opening to me. And then when I think about what's happening out there, and I started thinking back to the Steelhead meetings last winter, and we're having discussions about, restricting fishing to just banks. And then I'm looking at the current data on the Bonneville Dam and the Steelhead going up. And, this year we're right now, I guess if I got the numbers right, it's like 16% return of the 10-year average. And if you look at the Steelhead at Bonneville Dam for the decade before that, it's like 11%. And it's been such a tough summer. And as much as I hate to delay things, I think that in the long run, at the end of the day, the economy of our commercial fishermen and the benefits to our recreational fishermen will be best served by recovering the endangered species, not just preventing the extinction year after year, but actually recovering the species and using all the tools available. I think this is a supplemental year, as Morgan said. I think we would be better off to spend more money right now on the research and the assessment and the communication, and take another year to work with a broader group of legislators. Because I'm also concerned about whether it's our responsibility when, after all, we just finished agreeing with Oregon that the number one priority is conservation. Is it our responsibility to recover an industry that's declining because of loss of natural resources? This is really a state responsibility. And so I think we should actually put a hold on the reduction of the license program, keep working on it. What a great start the staff has made on it. Work with more legislators on it and the governor's office, of course. And we should put more money than currently in their supplemental request for the research and the assessment. Be more clear about the exact research that we need. So I am leaning towards, when we bring this up for a vote today, I'm leaning towards no for those reasons. So I'd like to have some discussion about what I just said from the other commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kuntz. Let's see, discussion. Commissioner McIsaac has his hand up. Okay, wait. You are muted, Don. Okay, when we started this meeting, Don,
Right.
there you go.
Okay, so I thought I was supposed to use my phone and not the Zoom. So I'm going to go and use the Zoom here. If it fails.
Okay, it already failed, Don.
Now I've got my phone back on and the Zoom both on. Is there reverb? Is this Jimi Hendrix or is this Commissioner McIsaac?
It works. Unfortunately, okay. Don, it's Commissioner McIsaac.
Okay. I was prepared to make a motion, and I guess once a motion is on the table, you can still have discussion. So I don't know exactly how to proceed here. I guess we get discussion both ways. Let me go ahead and make the motion, and in my discussion, I've got a few talking points, and at that point, I'll offer a perspective in response to Commissioner Kuntz on the relativity of license reduction and the bigger picture of recovery, and what might happen if the motion fails and what if it succeeds. So we want to try to do these motions in writing. So I'm going to put it up in writing. You've all seen this. It's going to be the staff recommendation here. But I think it's important because of some of the words here. Let's see if I can get this out of the way there. Can you see that in writing?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I move to approve the Columbia River License Reduction Program and Alternative Gear Development and Implementation Decision Package, adding it to the WDFW's 2022 Supplemental Operating Budget requested as presented by staff, with allowance for minor adjustments as staff prepare final documents for submittal to the Office of Financial Management. And if there's a second, then I'd like to speak to it.
I'm prepared to second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adopt the motion language that's on the screen. Go ahead, Don.
Okay, and I'll just point to one piece of wording in here, and then I'll take what's in writing off. And if you want to look at it again, this is right out of the staff situation summary. So I think it's important that this motion includes the package and not just refer to the monetary amount, but specifically to include the narrative that we just talked about. I want to give compliments also to staff about this on this new narrative. I think it is responsive to the dialogue on August 5th and 6th. It's very difficult to phrase how license reduction and implementation of alternative gear affect recovery as it relates to other things. But I think they've done a good job of putting some clarity into that. That'll be important to all the people who want to think about this process. The narrative does talk about commercial and recreational stakeholders and advisors, and we had some discussion on August 6th about making sure that we had commercial and recreational folks involved in the process. Our policy 3630 calls for this. I would add the conservation groups to that group as well, and I'm sure the staff's already been thinking that, but they've obviously got a strong stake in what they've been doing on the one of the alternative gears anyway. But I wondered about adding a bullet in there under communication and outreach and policy support, emphasizing that point, because I do view it as policy support when we talk to the recreational folks about how alternative gears might impact recreational fishing and all the rest. I'll just leave that up to the staff judgment. My main point here is that the narrative is very important. It includes a description of the license buyback thing that could go all kinds of different options. And so it's important to detail what the option really does. And this gets to what Rick Crozier spoke of. So I think that as we move to the communication plan, should this motion pass, that the OFM entities see that narrative, the governor's office be aware that we have reacted to their request and see that narrative, and the legislative folks as well. So with respect to whether it'd be good to put a hold on this now and not go forward with license reduction and try to focus on other areas of recovery, the narrative has a box insert on the first page, and it gets to clarity on wild salmon recovery, conservation and recovery. If we really want to get to major progress here, we need to look at the sources. The source of the recovery solutions is going to be found in the biggest cause of the problems. And on the Columbia River, the biggest cause of the problem for the decline in those areas where we are not in a state of recovery, where we need more recovery. And that's not every salmon population on the Columbia. It's a subset of those. It's no secret that the Columbia River dams are a major factor in what has happened to those areas that are having trouble with recovery, and those that have recovered, what kind of improvements in the hydropower system have been playing a role in that. And so they list here habitat protection and restoration, the passage through downstream passages by juveniles and upstream passage of adults in the hydropower system, predation from marine mammals, and hatchery practices. So I think it's important to note that there are those things that are going to make, some of those things are going to make a much bigger impact on recovery than any further reductions in fisheries. When you have a 2% take on steelhead or a 2% take on spring Chinook, your population dynamics modeling will show that a population is going to have a bigger, a 2% reduction going from 2% down to 1% or something like that is just not a significant enough difference. And again, the cause of the problem is the source of the solutions here. So the governor did ask us to put forward a supplemental budget proposal. The governor did veto 2 prior ones. The staff has done a very good job of responding, I think, to the elements in the governor's letter. I think we should move forward with a proposal because the governor asked us to prepare one. And with clarity on how this plays into the conservation and recovery factors here, we'll let the process roll out on that as the legislature looks at this and all the rest. To stop now and try to focus more on research begs the question of what more research is needed and where. And if you start looking at some of these populations, like we're going to be talking about in a little bit later today, Columbia River, upriver steelhead, many of which are above 8 dams. When you start looking at what kind of research is going to be needed to deal with that, that's a big question. We've got the Power Planning Council, the Power and Conservation Planning Council working on that. And it's a very complicated process. For the commission to then weigh in on additive research for hydropower survivals is a very big question that's going to take quite a while. So this buyback business has been on the table for quite a while. Implementation of alternative gear has been on the table for quite a while. I think this funding should go forward and try to do what we can in response to that for the reasons that were there in the old policy 3620. There were some reasons didn't happen. New policy 3630 calls for moving forward with those. If we said no now, we'd be contradicting the intent of our current policy. I don't think that's a good idea to do. And we would not be responsive to the governor's request. So I think maybe I'll just leave it right there for now.
Thank you, Commissioner McIsaac. All right, so the order that the hands went up here is Commissioner Anderson, then Chair Carpenter, then Commissioner Thorburn, and then Commissioner Smith. So go ahead, Jim.
Okay, first off, I think we all agree that recovery is the most critical place we need to get to, but steps along the way can be of a difference of opinion and the like. But I support the motion because I think it's the most logical step that we can take. I applaud the staff for really listening on both the alternative gear and the license reduction work and the clarity of the presentation on both, well, frankly, all three, from Morgan to Raquel to Charlene. And I think it's been very helpful, and I think it's important that we be clear about what we're trying to accomplish here and avoid the kind of the false narratives or the false expectations, or maybe expectations that aren't realistic, that aren't really going to do the things that perhaps some people have been saying, alluding to the fact that they would do that. There is no silver bullet on a lot of this stuff. It's a lot of hard work, but I think this package, as we have in front of us, is responsive to the directions we've gotten. Certainly the legislative action and governor's vetoes and all that sets a lot of framework for us to consider. And I think we are with this, and especially like the 6-page narrative, because I think that helps explain what it is we're trying to accomplish. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, so now we are to Commissioner or Chair Carpenter.
Thank you. Good morning. I appreciate the other comments, and I really do want to reach out to staff. I think they put in an awful lot of work, and that's much appreciated. My comments are going to be real brief. I do not think that this package is ready for prime time. There's a lot of work yet that I can see and speak to, but not right now. I just think it's too much. It would take me an hour to list some of the things I think that need to be worked on. My feeling is we should delay this for 1 year for the additional work that is needed. And I guess to close, I can't support it in its current state. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair Carpenter. So, Commissioner Thorburn.
Thank you, and thanks to Charlene and Raquel and Morgan for an excellent presentation. I support the motion. I'm not going to say very much. I really reflect the thoughts of Commissioner McIsaac. In supporting the motion, I support the excellent summary request document that's been prepared by staff as part of the package that I'll be voting on. And just to emphasize, of course, our greatest priority is conservation and recovery. And as Commissioner McIsaac pointed out, that takes broad efforts in areas that really are not solely or even very much the purview of the department, that is habitat and hydro, as was noted in the conservation document that's been prepared by the Joint State Group. We manage fisheries, and it's part of our statutory mandate. The management of fisheries is hold harmless, do no harm, and I think this work is contributing to that, and that's why I support the motion. I think it fits with our statutory mandate as well as all of the direction that we've received on these issues.
Thanks, Commissioner Thorburn. Commissioner Smith.
So I'm assuming that this funding is a request from the general fund appropriation. Yeah, I see Morgan shaking his head, yes. So whenever we make a request for general fund revenue, I'm very cognizant, sitting in this seat, of the need to be able to explain the benefit of the spending to Washington residents in general. And I think that Washington residents in general expect us to be doing a lot more for salmon conservation than we are doing. I mean, I hear it all the time. And yes, I hear Commissioner Thorburn's point that there are big aspects of conservation that we have little control over, hydro operation, etc. Nonetheless, I think that as we put a package like this together, we ought to consider including a portion for conservation. So I appreciated the really clear explanation, Charlene, you gave of how this really doesn't affect, that we're going to be harvesting fewer fish because it just changes who gets what. But could we not, to justify spending additional general fund revenue, say we're also going to reduce the harvest as a contribution to conservation? I've heard before that we can't create surplus fish, if you will, but I don't view the world that way. I just think that the public would have more faith in what we're doing if they could see that every program is, reducing harvest and moving us towards the conservation goal, even if it's, not a very big impact at all. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Commissioner Thorburn.
I just want to note that harvest does contribute to conservation. There is an expectation that we keep hatchery fish off the spawning grounds, and harvest is what does that.
So, is there any other discussion needed for Commissioner McIsaac's motion? Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, I'd like to address the alternative in that it seems like an assumption is if we don't make this request that somehow we have more tools to apply towards conservation recovery, and that isn't the context that we have in front of us. So, I mean, we've got a request from the governor. We know what's happened in the legislature with regard to the past license reduction programs. The alternative gear has been kicking along. Both of those are included in on our Columbia River policy, both of which are going to be subject of discussions with Oregon. And it just seems to me that we're kind of disarming or not loading up with things that we should have in our hip pocket as we go forward. Again, I reflect on what Commissioner Kuntz said. I mean, obviously the key is recovery, and but I don't see this as dropping this as a substitute in an increasing recovery. So,
Commissioner McIsaac.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Well, Commissioner Anderson said much of it. The alternatives, what happens if we don't move this forward? If it's not ready for prime time and some adjustments are needed, then we're going to have to put this on our agenda and work through that at some future sequence of meetings. If the topic is more aligned with putting more emphasis on recovery and reducing the take in fisheries, that's going to bring up all the questions that have been there for the decades that have settled into the current situation where you're balancing. And by you, I guess that means us as commissioners, it means the National Marine Fisheries Service and all the rest. So in habitat protection, you got a lot of these rivers in the Columbia Basin that have a lot of water taken out for agriculture, and they all have impacts on salmon. What's the fair take for them in the solution? We've got 1/3 of the Columbia River blocked from historical access due to dams. How do those folks share properly in the recovery of all of this? We've got the hydropower system that's in place now that has impacts. What about that? So it comes down to maybe a question of fairness and the rest of it, but it also comes into a question of, well, where do you want to spend money on exactly what? And that is a lengthy process that for us to weigh in is going to take some time. Someone mentioned our agreement with Oregon, which is a good point. I mean, if we can get to the point of having a comprehensive agreement with Oregon that has a solid conservation element to it, that we got another briefing on here today, that we can get down to specifics on that. And if it results in a need for additional money, then we can get to that. Commissioner Thorburn brought up a couple of the minor conservation things, and the big picture in terms of reduction on wild fish take, the staff's paper is correct. If you don't change the amount of take in a fishery, you're not going to have a big change on the trajectory of recovery. But there are some small ones. I think the staff has brought up a commercial fleet that's more manageable, has a conservation benefit in terms of the efficiency of managing the fleet, so you can make sure you stay within the quotas. If alternative gear does work successfully to remove hatchery fish, that will result in some conservation benefit on the spawning grounds. Now, how big of an interception in a new alternative gear is needed to make the significant change in PHOS, that's the subject of more investigation and has implications up and down the river to fisheries as well, including the tribal fisheries. So it gets very complicated. And so if we want to take on that bigger picture, it's going to take some time to weigh in on it. So I think this makes progress and is responsive. As I said, I won't repeat the arguments. So, but just a little response. And I think Commissioner Anderson's point is a good one. If this doesn't go forward, are we looking at success or failure as an action of the committee, of the commission?
Commissioner Kuntz, then Commissioner Carpenter, and then Commissioner Smith.
Well, after listening to everybody, first of all, I'm glad we're all once again agreeing that priority is conservation, and it's just a matter of how do you move there in the best possible way. And it seems to me that the communications request, the assessment, and the research requests are three out of four areas that everybody is in agreement that we could move forward during the supplemental year. I think we should today pass those three and defer the reduction of license because it's more complicated, as everybody's certainly echoing here this morning. And it would be better if we also work that out more clearly, as Commissioner Baker has brought up before with Oregon, since we're making such great progress with the joint work. So I think sometimes you have to do what you can do. And I think today we can move forward on those three areas. And again, it's a supplemental year, get back to work, keep working. And I do really think we also, the governor did veto the work. That's an indication that we don't have agreement with the legislature on this. And I think we would be better off working in that direction also. So after listening to everybody, I think we should pass the three areas and hold back for further work on the fourth, the reduction of licenses.
So, Commissioner Kuntz, I'm not asking you for language yet, but it sounds to me like what you were saying is that you would like to amend Commissioner McIsaac's motion.
That is correct.
Okay, so we still have to hear from Chair Carpenter and Lorna. May I ask that you kind of go offline or maybe email Joe just to get some written, just to get a written motion there for the amendment, or if you have it, give it to Nikki. But anyway, we need something that we put up on the screen in terms of amending Don's motion.
Sorry, Barbara, I missed that. You want me to call Nikki? Is that what you're saying?
Well, or let me just hear on.
Let's hear from Larry, then I'll rephrase it.
Okay, and Joe, if you're there, would you please see if you can reduce Fred's amendment to writing, which is to accept three of the four pieces of the budget request, leaving out the buyback piece for now. Okay, thanks. We have Chair Carpenter and then Commissioner Smith.
Well, I'll be brief. I think every commissioner that has spoken has made very valid points and comments. I wasn't aware that Commissioner Kuntz was going to come up with that discussion point, and I look forward to looking to that language. But the thing that jumps out at me on this is a whole bunch of what ifs. I mean, Commissioner McIsaac raised a bunch of what ifs. I just think that we're just a little bit too soon to have everything sorted out and a very thoughtful and pragmatic approach to this. And it worries me that it's gonna backfire. So I still suggest we call a timeout on this and try and critique it and make some modifications that eliminates a bunch of the what ifs. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Chair. Did somebody, hang on a minute, Fred. We've got Lorna to speak.
Along that line, my biggest concern is that we don't yet have a firm agreement with Oregon that they're not going to simply allow more licenses from those that we bought back. I mean, that would certainly not help the overall Columbia River situation at all. So I would like to have that agreement with Oregon worked out beforehand, that we're actually removing these licenses from the system overall. So I'd like to see that happen first. That's it.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Now, Commissioner Kuntz, you had you wanted to say something before Lorna talked. We have Jim's hand up. Did you want to respond to something somebody else just said?
Well, I think I would prefer to stick with the amendment I proposed, but I could also go along with tabling for a relatively brief amount of time, for a few weeks. If Chair Carpenter would prefer that, I would certainly agree to that. But I personally think we're ready to move forward with the other three aspects, and we can get that done and then just focus on the fourth one. Who knows? Maybe it could be worked out in a few weeks and that could end up going in. But I think today we're ready to move forward on three, and the staff can then, relax on those three and focus then on the fourth. So I think my amendment is probably the best rationale moving forward today.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, just drawing on experience. I mean, this is not a bright line kind of decision. We have a process that the budget goes through. The department has to get it to the governor's office. It goes to OFM. It's a legislative process. I'm comfortable with some uncertainty here. I think that if the dialogue with Oregon isn't fruitful, I mean, logic's going to tell us that we're not going to go ahead with certain actions that are futile. And so, in terms of the license reduction, so this is one of those things where I think we just need to put some things forward. It's reasoned, it's defensible. Are all the issues sorted out to everybody's satisfaction? No. And will they be after 3 weeks or 3 months? No. I think we just, I think we're at a point where we can make a decision, move it forward through the process. And if it doesn't hold water, it's not going to go very far. But if we miss this opportunity or this time frame, I think that we'll just be further back. And I, for one, kind of want to move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Oh, wow. Our director has his hand up. Go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you, Vice Chair Baker. Just a point of clarification as you all debate your action. We don't have a few weeks for agency request legislation or budget request. There are a couple of dates floating out there. One, the governor threw out a date of September 30. I thought we had heard from the last meeting that we definitely want a ask in our budget, our request, and that's due, I believe, on the 9th. Or maybe 10th. I'd look to Nate and or Morgan. So it just, I'm not weighing in one way or the other, but if the idea is to wait a few weeks, we will miss the opportunity to have an agency request budget on this item.
Well, okay, so I have I guess I have something that I want to say. Hesitate to, when you're chairing these meetings, you're not supposed to talk as well, but I do have a comment I'd like to make. There are a few things that I have been questioning on our current buyback proposal. I haven't received answers to them yet. And so for that reason, I'm, and that addresses the loopholes, the questions about whether people can turn around and buy different licenses from individuals, either in Washington or in Oregon. The issue that I have with the current iteration of the buyback, which everybody's already noted has been vetoed twice, and now we're supposed to put it in for an agency request, is that I am not comfortable that, and it's never been quite so starkly put out. So this is a compliment to staff. Thank you for such a good briefing. But the governor had a couple of objectives in the letters that he sent us, and the main one was what we were talking about: figuring out ways to recover more wild fish, or salmon conservation, getting fish out there for the orca, and the buyback. I'm not sure in thinking about it, and I guess I would ask somebody online here if the governor's point in stressing in his veto and in the letter to us was to stabilize commercial fisheries. I'm not all okay. So that's second point. Third point, Morgan, can we really spend in excess of $2 million in a supplemental budget request? Is it even possible for us to spend that much money? It seems like a lot. The governor, we had $1 million in our original request. Then there was $2 million in the second piece of legislation and budget, but that was for a 2-year biennium, and now we're asking for $2 million for 1 year essentially, and I don't get that either. So, and the fourth thing, the last thing I'd like to say on this is that we could accept Fred's amendment and still support this program. It doesn't have to be exactly in our budget request. We can still work with the governor's office, explain that, yeah, we still got some questions and we'd like to work it out, and resurrect this program for this year. I hesitate to say that because I know that all the tons of work that's gone into it, but it's obvious from me listening to us that we're divided on this. Whichever, it could be 4-4, it could be 5-4. That is not a good, strong mandate, and we need to do some more work on it. So for right now, I'm going to say that I would support Commissioner Kuntz's amendment to pass the three others and hold on to this the buyback provisions for a while, and I'm not sure what length of time. With that, I see Commissioner Thorburn, and then I see Commissioner Carpenter.
Thank you, Vice Chair Baker. We keep talking about the fact that that a buyback program has been vetoed twice, and then we get a letter from the governor that directed us to work on it. It seems to me that it's a little bit inaccurate to portray that it's the program itself that's been vetoed. The first time it was vetoed was because we were going into a budget shortfall or concerned about it. And he was line item vetoing anything that was a new program at the time. The second time it was vetoed was because of a proviso that was attached to it. So it wasn't because I don't think the governor was telling us that he is not looking for a buyback program. So to keep bringing up the fact that it's been vetoed twice, I think is a little bit inaccurate in characterizing the governor's support for this program.
Thank you, Kim. Chair Carpenter. Apparently you're muted, Larry.
Pardon me. In response to Commissioner Thorburn, I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I wouldn't for a minute suggest that the legislature was particularly happy about their legislation being vetoed. And that is an important factor looking forward. I have a bit of a change of heart here. I haven't heard in total Commissioner Kuntz's amendment to the motion, but I am in agreement with what he stated and Vice Chair Baker in regards to pulling the buyback piece out and passing the balance of the package. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to comment on this? Haven't heard anything from Commissioner Linville yet, but I'm not going to put you on the spot. This is a really tough one for us, and I just want to make sure that oh wait, I see Commissioner Smith. We do need to get to a motion or to a decision here pretty quickly. Go ahead.
Well, and that's my point, is that it seems like we should be prepared to bring up the amendment to the original motion, but we haven't seen the language yet. So is that forthcoming?
Well, I've gotten a text from Nikki that says she has some language, and I see Joe Panesco smiling. So Joe, what you got?
Yeah, so I haven't seen what Nikki has, so she can show her proposal. I have also started with the original proposed motion language and propose an amendment that I would need, that I'm also willing to present. So let's go ahead and see what Nikki has first.
Are these like options? I see 3 slides to the left and 1 here. Nikki?
No, this is, the top one is the amendment. The second one is the original language. And then the third one is for the next agenda item.
Okay. What do you think, Joe? Without the license reduction portion is a tiny bit confusing. What does your language say?
Mine was very similar to that, but what I had done is I'd quickly skimmed through the slide presentation that the commission just saw, and where it had the dollar amounts broken out across the 4 areas of license reduction, alternative gears, outreach, policy support, and fisheries assessment. And in that one slide that had those 4 buckets, it said that the license reduction portion was 2.17 million. So my proposed motion language had actually included that dollar amount. But otherwise, is this proposed language was basically, it's functionally the same as what I had thought of. But I would defer to staff on whether those buckets as split out, if saying, hey, we're going to dump license reduction of 2.17 million, is that clear enough from the budgeting perspective with respect to the 3 remaining programs? Were things that cleanly segregated within the proposal?
I'm looking at Morgan and he's nodding his head. Do you have a comment, Morgan?
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Baker. I think that language is very, very clear. The 2 million of those dollars are really just for the sort of license reduction piece, and then there's a little bit of additional staff work in getting it going. The only piece that's that I might call out that's included in that 2.17 million that we might consider keeping is there's a consultant that we have who's doing sort of on the ground work as part of that piece, and so when we specify that $2.17 million, I would assume that would be kind of yarded out of the package, and that might not be staff's recommendation, even if we're not going to go forward with the license buyback. Sort of kind of looking towards Raquel and Dr. Hurst's face, getting a gentle nod. Yeah.
So the question is whether we need to refine the motion if we have a motion to make it clear that what we are not accepting is the actual buyback piece itself, but that we want to keep the agency activities that support the development of that. Is that what you're saying, Morgan?
I think so, and I think that the motion language as presented a moment ago makes that clear enough for staff, and that we could move forward with that, especially with that language that says minor adjustments are allowed.
So I'm looking at Raquel, who's nodding her head. Do you agree with that, Raquel?
Yeah, Vice Chair Baker, and I think that's a good idea, Morgan. We certainly want to keep the contractor on board to help us think through alternatives and continue the development work. That's separate from the implementation pieces we had also in the budget request. So thanks for that.
Okay, we have Commissioner Smith and Commissioner Anderson. Oh, Commissioner Smith forgot to lower her hand. Commissioner Anderson and then Commissioner McKinsey.
Yeah, well, we're talking about some alternative language and it flashed up here, but it didn't appear to be complete. And so I want to get a look at that. Otherwise they're going to make a mistake. So is there language? Is this it?
I think that's the language, Commissioner Anderson.
That it seems like even the title is a little bit misleading. We're getting rid of the license reduction program. We're approving it by this language. So
Commissioner Anderson, I think what Nikki did in drafting this language and that Joe has ratified is use sort of exactly the title of the briefing paper we were given and the title of this package. So the package is the Columbia River License Reduction Program and Alternative Gear Development and Implementation Decision Package. But then we're saying without the license reduction portion of that package. It's confusing, but that's what it is.
Well, it is confusing, and I think it's a tad on the sloppy side. But you know, if people are comfortable with voting for that, then it can stand.
The alternative would be to do it instead of saying without the, license reduction. We could say that the reworded and say that the amendment says that we are approving alternative gears, communication, outreach, and policy support, and fisheries assessment, which are the other three prongs. From what I've heard, the intent isn't to say no to the buyback forever, but basically, well, I don't want to put words in Fred's mouth, but to work on it some more, I think was what he said in the next few weeks. So if you'd like it be done with, instead of saying without license reduction, in other words, what we're not doing, instead have the amendment say what we are doing, I'm sure we could come up with that pretty quickly. Remember in all of this, what our esteemed counselor tells us is that what's very important as we are doing these parliamentary procedures is that we all know what we're voting on. And we just need to all understand what we're voting on and be clear on that.
No, I agree with that.
And Chair Baker, if I could just make one clarification with respect to the parliamentary procedure. The motion here needs to be in the form of a motion to amend the original motion. And in this sense, I mean, as long as this is phrased as, I move to amend the original motion by substituting it with this following language, then we cover that small bit of parliamentary procedure as well.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I see, is your hand still up or up again? Okay, we're going to go with Commissioner McIsaac.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. This is a point of order. Amendments should be made by commissioners. And this process is getting a little loose here. And when we start talking about what we really mean and what we don't really mean and trying to get that in the amendment and all the rest of it, I think it's symptomatic of where we're at. I've got some reasons to object to this motion, but amendment. But I think procedurally, we need someone to make an amendment. We have a main motion on the floor right now. And instead of talking about that, we're talking about an amendment that hasn't been made yet and doing a tremendous amount of wordsmithing, which does expose some logic and some illogic. But I think if we're going to move forward, we need somebody to put an amendment on the table and then we deal with it. This is a point of order.
Okay, Commissioner McIsaac, what we are concerned with here is something that has been of importance to you over the years, which is having written amendment motion or written motion language on the screen. The original amendment to your motion, there was a written language developed. That language has now been changed. If you look at the screen and it says, I move to amend the original motion to approve. That language has been ratified by our counselor. So I'm assuming that this right here, which we're all looking at, is Commissioner Kuntz's amendment. Lorna, I know you're next, but we need to go to Fred to make sure that this is the amendatory language that he's looking for to the original motion. Commissioner McIsaac's correct. We need to be clear on this stuff, but let me know if this is what you want to do.
I move to amend the original motion to approve the Columbia River License Reduction Program and Alternative Gear Development and Implementation Decision Package as presented by staff without the license reduction portion. This adds it to the WDFW 2022 supplemental operating budget with allowance for minor adjustments as staff prepare final documents for submittal to the Office of Financial Management. Vice Chair Baker, I ask for a second to my motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we amend the original motion. Commissioner Smith. Are y'all done?
Yeah, just that was for my second.
Okay. Commissioner McIsaac.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I've heard a lot of the rationale over the past few minutes here, and I'm not going to support the amendment. I think the governor has asked us for a supplemental budget request for a license buyback program. If we do not do this, we'll be doing something against what the governor in writing asked us to do. There may be good enough reasons to do that. If that's the will of the commission, then it would go forward. But it's unfortunate that there will be people who will say, here's the commission, the governor asked them to do something, and they can't even get that done. On the merits of all of it, it's a little unusual to hear a couple of commissioners who have been behind the buyback program for quite some time that apparently might not be now. That's a little curious that here when we get to this stage of the program that's what comes out. If we did pass this amendment, then the narrative that the staff is prepared would all need to be changed. I guess I could presume, and I'd ask Kelly Susoin to chime in if it's not true, that they could handle all of that. But at any rate, I think it's best to move forward with the package that the staff put forward for this particular meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner McIsaac. I'd like to clarify that if I was one of the commissioners that has been supportive of this program for years, that isn't now, I am still supportive of this program. I am just not, I think that this could use a bit of improvement and would like a little time to work on it. I'm not sure if you were referring to me, but I might as well make that clear. Chair Carpenter.
Thank you. I pulled up some excerpts from the governor's letter to Kelly and myself. And what the governor said in the letter, the purpose of the buyback, and this is a quote, reducing the gillnet fishery on the Columbia River as needed to ensure the recovery of salmon and sustain responsible fisheries. I guess I'll add, and a quote, that I don't know that where we stand right now does that. Also, he wrote in the same letter, consult with Oregon on developing a Columbia River fishery that creates the least harm to wild fish and is the most beneficial to salmon recovery efforts on the Columbia and Snake Rivers. I think it needs some fine tuning, and that's why that's my position regarding the amended motion.
Thank you, Chair Carpenter. Commissioner Anderson.
Well, I am not in favor of the amendment. I think we have a good package that could go forward. I understand we have an amendment on the table, of course. Getting to the governor's letter, I think it's a little bit hard to divine the specific outcomes or the purpose of that letter. It has several different aspects to it, so it depends on where you sit probably and how you look at this. But I, for one, think that we've got enough to go forward with in the original package, and I'll leave it at that.
Wait, Kelly, I think you're muted.
No, I hadn't started speaking yet. Sorry.
Oh.
Waiting to be called on. For my own clarification, I'm not clear, but the way I would read this is it would prevent, and I really don't want to confuse a confusing amendment to a motion, but this says without the license reduction portion. Does that include the work to support the license reduction portion? I think the amendment didn't mean to do that, but some clarity that that's really the dollars that go to the buyback of licenses directly, not the dollars that support the work that I hear the makers of the amendment motion wanting to continue. But to me, it's unclear. So I thought, I hope to clarify and not add confusion.
Thank you for that question, Kelly. I see Commissioner Kuntz's hand is up.
Director Sussman, that's exactly what I intended. And that's the second paragraph. I think with the minor adjustments, it would be understood that that would allow that work to be continued. But again, our lawyer could make it even more lawyerly if you prefer. And I think we're all in agreement with what you said.
Okay. I believe it's time to call for the question, unless I see any other hands. Making it clear then that the without the license reduction portion is referring to the $2 million that was set aside for the actual buybacks. Otherwise, minor adjustments, Morgan can do his magic with the department with OFM if the amendment passes. We've all heard the amended language. I think we're going to need a roll call on this, but let's try it this way. Nikki, could you take down the language so that we can see everybody? Thank you. Let's see. All in favor of the amendatory language prepared by Commissioner Kuntz, signify by saying aye.
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 So let's do a raised hand here too. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. All opposed signify by saying nay and raising hands.
Nay.
Okay. We have a 4-4 vote, which is kind of what I think we all expected in this. My understanding is that we have to have a majority to pass an amendment. I'd like to look to Joe Pinesco to affirm that.
I think a tie vote on 4-4 is a non-action. So
Okay.
It would be a failure of the motion.
Okay, thank you. Hold on a minute.
The amendment would pass. The 4-4 tie would mean the amendment would pass, wouldn't it?
No.
Okay.
Okay, hang on a minute, everybody. Commissioner Rendell has a comment.
I have no idea. I did not touch the button. It just raised my hand. Sorry.
All right. According to, okay, the amendment has failed for lack of a majority. So we are now to, I saw your hand up, Fred. Do you want to, do you have more to say?
Am I allowed to make a comment at this point? Because
Sure.
I just want to be clear. Then we'll go to by Robert's Rules of Order. We'll vote on the original motion. If the same 4-4 vote holds, then none of the 4 areas will pass, which would be a shame.
I'm very sure that you're correct. Commissioner Kuntz, we see Commissioner Isaac's hand up.
I just want to make sure that, Commissioner Lindlow, for example, understood that. And if not, could we take a revote?
Well, we can't reconsider the amendment to the original motion quite yet. That's not going to happen. But let's go to Commissioner McIsaac.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Just to reiterate, yes, that's true. If the main motion is a 4-4, that main motion will fail. And let me just reiterate, I think maybe what Commissioner Anderson said. This is a proposal. This is a budget proposal that goes forward. So for those folks who don't think the license buyback is a good idea, it doesn't mean that there is one adopted by the legislature. It's just a proposal going forward. And I guess, absent anything else, looking at the clock, I'd call for the question.
Is there any further, does anybody else want to make any comments before we vote on the original motion? Okay, the motion was presented by Commissioner McIsaac, and it was essentially to accept all 4 pieces of the supplemental budget request.
I did have my hand up.
Okay, sorry, I must have missed you.
Just kind of carry through with what Commissioner Kuntz was saying. Those of us that support all the really great parts of this program now are faced with a real dilemma. And I still believe very strongly that the buyback portion is not ready for prime time. And yet, I'm torn because I really support the rest of the program. And I don't know, do we ever offer any direction that maybe isn't included in the motion or something to the effect that, before implemented, this program needs further work and especially needs to have that agreement with Oregon in place? Or would that have to be an amendment to the original?
That would be another motion, and I don't think that we can pass funding requests conditionally, Commissioner Smith. Of course, we can do anything we want, but that really wouldn't make any sense. I think we understand your concern. I share some of those concerns. I'm also feeling the time pressure here. We have a joint meeting with Oregon that's supposed to start in 17 minutes. And we still have another, at least one more item on the agenda. So let's go with Commissioner Anderson. Well, actually, let's go back to Joe real quick, and then Commissioner Anderson, and then Commissioner Thorburn.
Thank you. I had a little bit more suggestion with respect to Commissioner Smith's question, and it was suggested previously with, this is a supplemental budget request that due to timing needs to go to the governor's office. So there would be maybe additional ability of the commission to further shape what a buyback program could look like. And I say the maybe because it all depends upon if the legislature chooses to run with this request, if the governor includes it in his budget and the legislature chooses to run with it, they could, as we saw last session, place any other provisos on it and shape it how they see fit. And if they do it that way and it's approved, then your hands are tied. You need to follow with whatever they direct. Could the commission influence that process? Hopefully so. So there's always room for future influence in that process, which is going to be a very long process stretching out to the end of the budget next session.
That raises, several people, including Commissioner Thorburn and Commissioner Anderson, have raised the same point that Commissioner Smith and I are making. That is that this thing is a proposal and it will change by the time that we are done with the legislative session. What I'm concerned about is that my vote to approve this package, which is going to telegraph how I'm going to vote, I will vote aye on it. We're not going to have this package go down on a 4-4 vote. But what I do not want to have come back to us is that, well, you, Commissioner Baker, voted yes, so you have to support this exact language in this exact package, because many of us, as we can tell by this very long discussion, believe that it needs some improvement. So on that condition, assuming everybody else stays with the vote, then we can get on with it and get this over with. Commissioner Anderson.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what you said, is that there's a work in progress here, but we have some time frames, and the reality of the matter is they're right in front of us. And so I'm comfortable with a degree of uncertainty and further dialogue, but reasonably, I think we just need to get something out there and move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Kuntz, to wrap it up.
Yeah, I will continue to vote no, and I'm sure the motion will pass. But I think it's a good reminder to the governor's office why we need a 9th commissioner. And also, I think it's a signal to the folks out there that have a different perspective that they can now, what's going to happen is there'll be a lot of lobbying against this to the governor's office. And by some of us voting no, at least it's sending a signal that certainly the 8 commissioners were not in agreement with moving forward on the reduction license program, and they can feel happy to quote us.
Thank you, Commissioner Kuntz. I see no more raised hands. So I'd like to go along with Commissioner McIsaac's call for the question. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the Columbia River Commercial License Reduction Program and Alternative Gear Development and Implementation Budget Package. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
How many? 5? Okay, so can we, let's say I see me, Commissioner Thorburn, Commissioner McIsaac, Commissioner Linville, and Commissioner Anderson. Did I miss anyone? All opposed, same sign. Okay, that would be Kuntz, Carpenter, and Smith. The motion carries. Wow, okay. I guess we have a decision to make. We need to move on to agenda item B. And that's Ferruginous Hawk periodic status review, uplist, and decision. Taylor Cotton will be assisting us with this. I wonder, Taylor, how much time do you think you will need for the, oh, wait a minute. Hang on just a second, Morgan. Let me just find out how much time we need to finish the meeting. Taylor, is this a long or a short presentation?
My presentation is very brief.
Okay, thanks. Then we will go back to Morgan.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair Baker. I have one more budget-related item, and I will make it very brief. I'm looking to seek reauthorization of the maintenance level budget request. We've had some late-breaking changes here. The changes are in 3 areas: a technical correction that we want to make to 24 net expenditure authority, and large increases to our true current fire placeholder packages. That's for fire suppression costs and fire recovery. The east side is really burning up, and we're going to continue to see large changes there. I'm hopeful that although these items are emergent and late breaking, that the commission would move to approve these changes to the maintenance level budget request.
Thank you, Morgan. I forgot just in the last hour that slipped my mind. Is everybody comfortable? We sent out a late breaking change that we needed a decision on some fire-related issues and that were not included in the original package that we got. And what I appreciated about this is that we gave staff in our original approval the ability to make minor adjustments. Morgan sent us all a note yesterday making it clear that they kind of decided that the millions that we needed to reinvest in our fire budget wasn't minor, and so they need our approval. I'd like, Nikki, if you can find the motion that needs to be made, or maybe Commissioner Thorburn's prepared to make one. Commissioner Thorburn.
I'm prepared to make the motion. For the maintenance level portion of the 2022 supplemental operating budget, I move to approve the maintenance level portion of the 2022 supplemental operating budget request as presented by staff with allowance for minor adjustments as staff prepare final documents for submittal to the Office of Financial Management.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Thorburn, with Commissioner Smith seconding. Does anybody have any short comments? Emphasis on short. Seeing none, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the additional maintenance level request for fire. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you, and thank you for understanding why we needed to amend this budget. I mean, not the amend the budget, amend the agenda. And Morgan, thank you for keeping us on track and for just doing all the fine work you've been doing. We're going to switch now to agenda item B, which is Ferruginous Hawks. And I'm going to ask Larry, can you take over for 5 minutes, Larry?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Okay, we're number 2. Let's get started with this as quickly as we can, please.
Thank you, Chair Carpenter. Good morning, Commissioners. I will try to be very brief with my presentation. I know you're crunched for time. I'm going to try to share my screen. Or maybe be faster. Nikki, if you have it up, you might be able to share the presentation.
Yep, give me just 2 seconds. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Taylor Cotton. I'm the Conservation Assessment Section Manager within the Wildlife Program in the Diversity Division. I'm going to just recap what we discussed at our last commission meeting around the Ferruginous Hawk and the decision we have in front of us today. Reviewing what we discussed last time, this is the 5-year status review for the Ferruginous Hawk. This is the first one for this species. Timeline and process we went through to get to this point. We started in February 2017, soliciting information as we were preparing and considering the status review. The document actually went out for peer review in 2019, and then again for public comment in 2021. We're just seeking that decision on the uplisting recommendation from threatened to endangered today. Next slide, please, Nikki. Reviewing some of the threats that were discussed. Commissioner Thorburn, I see your hands up.
Sorry, I didn't know you had another slide. I'll put my hand back down.
I think I have 2 more. Reviewing the threats that we discussed last time, we're seeing a decrease in the occupied nesting territories and productivity across the state. Declines in prey base, which we are trying to work on as part of recovery actions and conservation for those species specifically. We're seeing habitat loss and fragmentation due to wildfires and the potential threats from wind energy development overlapping the habitat nesting territories for Ferruginous hawks. Next slide, Nikki. Some of the comments we've seen so far, or comments we've seen to date, the public comments had 18 total, 11 citizens and 3 organizations. 1 positive verbal comment was received during the presentation earlier this month. And 1 neutral citizen comment. And I apologize, I'm getting confused here. 11 total comments, 1 positive verbal, 1 neutral, and the rest were positive for this uplisting recommendation from threatened to endangered as part of the periodic status review. And I have motion language on our last slide if we're prepared to move that direction.
Mr. Thorburn, I expect you were prepared to do that. Commissioner Thorburn,
Yes, thank you.
you're muted. Okay.
Take the motion. I move to adopt the recommended rule changes as presented by staff to uplist Ferruginous Hawk from threatened to endangered.
I second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second by Commissioner Smith. Any further comments? Commissioner Thorburn, is your hand up to speak?
Oh, I will just say that the reason I'm making the motion is I think the staff has presented a strong case that this bird needs greater protection that can be offered, and making more visibility about the decline of the species by uplisting it to endangered. That's why I'm making the motion.
Very good. Thank you for that. We have a motion and a second. I'll call for the question. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Who opposed? Is that you, Commissioner McIsaac?
No, I was the last in line of the ayes.
Okay, so we had no nays then. Okay. Okay, thank you for that, Taylor. Have a good day. Back to you, Vice Chair Baker.
Okay, so we are at a bit of a crossroads here. We still have 2 agenda items on this meeting, and we also have a meeting starting in 5 minutes with Oregon, with my guess a whole bunch of interested people waiting for us. Should we continue with future meeting planning and general discussion, or can we put that off until our next meeting? Is there anything burning that anybody needs to say, I think is my question.
My recommendation would be to put it off.
Thank you, Larry. Your recommendation goes a long way. How about Commissioner Smith?
My only concern is there have been some rather important, largely personnel issues that have come up in the last week, and I'm not sure we want to wait as long as the next commission meeting to deal with those, and we may want to have a consideration of, an executive session. So I just threw that out there.
You are referring to the governor's proclamation, Lorna?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, well, then let's talk about that. Talk to Larry and I think Joe Pinesco, and we will see if we need to get one scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, everybody's changing. I see Commissioner, I thought Thorburn, but now McIsaac. Commissioner Thorburn, your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple of things on the September agenda. I also was going to request an executive session, but not for personnel matters, for legal issues. And if there's agreement to have an executive session, I will talk offline with our attorney on the legal issues that I've noted. And I would imagine that he has a few things to report to the commission as well in an executive session. So I'm requesting that we have a legal issues executive session added to the September meeting. And secondly, the Wildlife Committee is not meeting. We don't have staff on board to hold a Wildlife Committee meeting. And I'm also talking to staff about not having a Wolf Committee meeting because the agenda items have recently been covered. And one of the agenda items that it shows for the Wolf Committee meeting is actually scheduled for the full commission. So just a heads up that those 2 committees probably are not going to be meeting with the September meeting as shown on the year at a glance.
Thank you, Kim. So Commissioner McIsaac.
Very quickly, again, in favor of an executive committee committee meeting for a different purpose regarding litigation updates. And I'll get with Joe besides between meetings, and if that reason is not necessary, I'll withdraw it.
Don, point of clarification. Did you say executive committee or executive session? I thought you said committee.
I probably did say committee, but I meant executive session. So another reason in my mind for that to be added to our September meeting.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kuntz.
I was caught off guard by the Togo kill order that went out. requesting for meetings, the Commissioner of the Wolf Committee, and also shared at least 48 hours in advance with the data package that goes to the director and his decision. So something for the Wolf Committee to consider.
Fred, you were breaking up very badly in that. Can you restate your point?
I think we're done.
Okay. Kelly Suswin, is there anything that you had that you absolutely needed to impart to us before we end this meeting?
And not that I'm aware of. I support the need for an executive session at the next commission meeting, and otherwise, no, I don't think so.
Okay. With all of that in mind, we will set off a full discussion of future meeting planning and a general discussion until our next regular meeting. I think it's clear that we will add an executive session to that meeting. And I would like for Nikki to let our participants know that we need, on the next call, we probably all need about 5 minutes, and we will be there a few minutes late. Please let Mary Wall know. And with all that said, thank you all for a very, very full meeting today. And I'm hereby adjourning the August 27th meeting of the Fish and Wildlife Commission. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Recording stopped.